Um, well, Murray, we have a list of questions here, and I wanted to ask you some of these and get your thoughts about your career and the field of behavior analysis. So let's start off with this one. What events in your own history led you to become a behavior analyst?
Well, I think I went through a lot of that yesterday.
Yeah.
Actually, I told how I began. I don't know if you want any repetition. No.
Sure.
But of course, I went through the program at Columbia when they first started the new laboratory, the undergraduate laboratory, and that got me started, and I continued from there. I had a lot of fine experiences at Columbia, which just led me on into the field deeper and deeper. One of the nice things that happened, of course, Keller and Schoenfeld were just writing their book while I was a student there.
The Principles of Psychology.
Yes, yes, Principles of Psychology. And that's a great book. It still is a great book. And I'm surprised I don't see it being used more.
Mm-hmm.
One of the good things about it was that it covered all the topics in standard psychology. Well, it gave a behavior analytic point of view on it all.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't seem to realize that. We didn't come out of there not knowing anything about the rest of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
We knew all the kinds of questions that were being asked, the people who were asking them, and so on. But I was so pleased when I was a graduate student. They asked me if I would take care of the illustrations.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. And they indicated what illustrations they wanted and left it up to me to either find them or make them or whatever way we could do it. And I was kind of scared because I can't draw worth a darn. But I was able to find relevant things apparently. They seemed very pleased at what I did. They thanked me for it in their introduction.
Oh, great.
But years and years later, when the Skinner Foundation reprinted the book, I couldn't believe it, but they asked me to do the introduction to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an incredible experience for me.
Now, at this time, it'd be strange to say that there was something called behavior analysis. What was it called at the time?
Operant conditioning.
Mm-hmm.
That's all. Yeah, it wasn't called behavior analysis at all.
Right.
I don't know how that got started. Actually,
yeah, it's a long.
I really don't know.
A long path to get to that term.
That might have a lot more. The people who started ABBA might know a lot more about that.
Mm-hmm.
Starting at the Midwestern.
Right.
ABBA, that's what they called it.
Right, the MABA. Right.
MABA. I wasn't involved in that at all. I got involved in ABBA long after it had really gotten started.
Mm-hmm. I always wondered at that time there were other learning theories prevalent. Did Keller and Schoenfeld talk about Hull and Spence, Tolman, or the other learning theorists?
Oh, we knew about them. I don't remember how much they talked about them. They didn't talk about them much in the textbook, not as theories. They didn't have a general discussion of theories at all in that textbook.
Which it'd be hard pressed to find a psychology textbook that didn't.
Today, I know, yeah. But theories as such weren't their concern at all. But as graduate students, we were really involved. We read Hull in great detail. Spence was very important to us. Spence came to Columbia one summer.
Really?
They had him come, and he gave a couple of summer courses, and we all took them. Me and my 3 other fellow graduate students at the time. I was very close to 3 of them. Donald Cook was one of them. He's the most well-known of the others. And Mike Kaplan, I don't know if you know Mike Kaplan at all, and Charlie Corsetti, who kind of disappeared. He got his degree and went up to work for the Army upstate New York, and we never heard from him again. He was probably the smartest of the 4 of us, but he dropped out. It's really a shame because he would have contributed a great deal. But when Spence came, we fought with Spence.
Oh, really?
Tremendously, the 4 of us, and we had an effect on him. When he went back to Iowa after the summer, he said outright, what I have to offer has nothing to do with instrumental conditioning.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Were there things that you took?
That's what he called it, instrumental conditioning.
Right. Were there things that you think still influenced you from Hull and Spence? Were there any residual effects, I guess, of reading those earlier
Well,
influences?
I had a funny residual effect from reading Hull. Before I read Hull, one of my ambitions was to make a system, a model system based on mathematics
Mm-hmm.
to handle behavior. And then I ran across Hull's book in the bookstore. I hadn't heard about it at all. I picked it up and I started reading it. I said, my God, this guy's done it already. And then I kept going through it and I said, but it's terrible. And I gave up. I gave up that approach completely. So it's one of the after effects on me. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had mentioned about your training at Columbia. What were some of the experiences in that graduate training at Columbia that set up your career and perhaps led to your dissertation?
Well, at that time, as I've indicated in some publication or another, avoidance was in the air.
Yeah, why is that? Because of the war, or?
No. I don't know how it got started, but several dissertations were done on avoidance behavior. One of the important ones was Hefferline's,
Mm-hmm.
in which he, well, I can't remember exactly the procedure anymore, but he was able to measure not just the avoidance response, but the animal's approaches to the avoidance response.
Mm.
Because he had to move his nose in the slaughter or something, or maybe he even recorded the distance a lever had moved or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw the other behavior that was going on. And that's what gave rise to Schoenfeld's theory that the avoidance behavior was reinforced by the termination of other behavior that had been shocked.
Mm-hmm.
Hefferline showed that actually happening. It's incredible. And I can't remember the names of the other people before who had done some very germinal work.
Right. But so this was happening at
So this was happening
at Columbia.
At Columbia. Yes. And then I read Schoenfeld's article, as I indicated, in which he gave his toothpaste tube theory of avoidance, avoidance response being squeezed out by the punishment of everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gave rise to my dissertation.
Yeah. Well, were there? Did you teach when you were a graduate student?
Oh boy, my GI Bill had run out by that time, and I had 4 or 5 different jobs at the same time, including teaching in the extension courses.
What were the extension courses?
University extension was for people who weren't in any of the colleges. People just came in and took courses.
Oh, okay.
I remember one time I was teaching the second half of the introductory course. There's people who are coming in from all over, adults, young people, old people, everybody.
Yeah.
And we had to use Woodworth's textbook. Woodworth, yes, that's our text. And so I used Woodworth, except that I retranslated everything in Woodworth to offer conditioning stuff. But one of the men, I remember this man who came up to me when we were finished, and he said, "Oh, Dr. Sidman, thank you so much." He said, "I took Professor Woodworth, the first semester of Professor Woodworth's course 20 years ago," something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It was more than 20 years. It was before I was born, so it was a little more than 20 years ago. He said, "And now you've finished off the course for me. I'm so grateful to you."
That must have been very exciting.
Yeah.
What did you do after you graduated?
I went to Walter Reed.
That's right.
Joe Brady recruited me for Walter Reed. He came to Columbia specifically looking for a student of Nat Schoenfeld's.
Right.
Because he had read that same article
Ah.
that produced my dissertation. And he said, I want somebody who thinks like this. And of the 4 of us who were just finishing at that time, For some reason, he picked me. I don't know why. But
a fortuitous event.
it was, yes. Yes, it was. And so that's how I got there. I had spent 1 year, postgraduate year really, being Fred Keller's lab assistant in a Morse code project that he had received a grant for. I think it was his first grant.
Really?
The
So
department didn't run on grants at that time.
No.
Clarence Graham in Vision had a lot of grants,
Mm.
but nobody else did.
Well, I didn't know that Fred Keller was still working on Morse code. This is in the mid-50s then, or early 50s.
Early 50s,
Yeah.
yeah.
Really?
Not, just to some extent. I had, when I was in the service, I was a radio operator. And I didn't know it at the time, but I learned my Morse code with his code voice method.
You were essentially trained by him.
I was trained by him without knowing it at the time.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
What was it like to be a behavior analyst during those early years in the 50s?
Well, it wasn't, in some ways, it was very exciting. No question of that. We all knew each other. There weren't so very many of us. We
Small
didn't have
club.
a lot of publications. I had all the publications in a small card file, all summarized.
Yeah.
I knew every one in great detail.
Yeah.
And so did everybody else. And we all knew each other. We used to come to the meetings. We used to lay out our cumulative records on the bed. And that's how we spent our time. We didn't care about going to other papers. We wanted to talk to each other. So it was very exciting.
Was that at EPA? I mean, did everybody go to
The EPA
Eastern?
was the main one we went to, but we also went to APA
Mm.
for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And then EPA was very friendly for a long time. Then it stopped being friendly too.
Mm-hmm.
And so in many ways it was very difficult as far as having a position in the wider world of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
It was very difficult. It was very hard to get papers published.
Right.
And that was why JAB got started, actually.
Right. The impetus for that.
I was one of the few people who published in the Journal of Comparative and Physiological Psychology. I never was able to make the Journal of Experimental Psychology. Part of the reason was I had a chip on my shoulder. I fought with the editors.
Mm-hmm.
I sent my manuscripts in with saying terrible things to them. You can't publish this the way it is. Don't send it to don't waste time sending it to somebody else. Just send it right back to me. I used to say this kind of thing to them. I had terrible correspondence with Harry Harlow.
Oh, really?
Oh, it was awful. I sent him my dissertation first. And one of the big problems I had these beautiful figures, these wonderful curves,
Mm-hmm.
Rate versus response shock interval, and had several shock intervals. They were fantastic quantitative data, and but I couldn't put it all in the curves because the curves got in each other's way. They were so close to each other.
Mm.
And so I put the tables. There was a lot of space up here in the graphs, and I put the tables up in that space. He says, you can't publish both tables and curves. It's not permitted. Oh, I had a terrible correspondence with him about that. They wanted me to change things. I accused them of being prejudiced and not really interested in what was being done.
So others must have been experiencing this.
Yeah.
That's what led to JAB being formed?
Others didn't fight with him. So
Yeah.
They just took their rejections and swallowed them.
But eventually there must have been some group of you who got together and said, well, it's time for us to start.
Oh, that's right. That's right. And I think that story is probably told pretty well in Vic Lady's website on his JAB
in the early days of JAB.
Yeah. But that was interesting. That was interesting times too, just getting it started.
Mm-hmm.
The law firm that we went to, it was Dave Rioch who hired both Joe and me, who recommended this law firm. It turned out to be the one with, oh dear, I can't remember his name anymore, a famous lawyer I heard something.
I think Rita was chiming in.
Abe Fortas.
Abe
Fortas. It was his law firm. He wasn't the one who set us up, but it was his law firm that set us up.
And he became a Supreme Court.
He didn't. either he didn't quite make it, or he made it and had to leave quickly. I forget which. They found he'd taken some money that he shouldn't have taken, and so he ended up in disgrace. But he was a fantastic lawyer, actually. But it was his law firm that set us up.
Really? And you had to go to a law firm to...
Well, because we were setting up not just the journal, but the society,
society.
that published the journal.
Okay.
And we had to get it. That helped us get our tax-free status.
Right. All the paperwork and bureaucracy you have to get out of the way.
And that was all done.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun doing all
that. What do you consider your most important contribution to behavior analysis, or what would you like to be remembered for?
Well, I don't know what the answer to that is. I thought a bit about that question. I knew you were going to ask it. And my philosophy always is that it's the effect you have on the environment that determines the importance of what you've done. And to me, the importance of a work is judged by the number of other researchers whose behavior it affects. And the avoidance work has affected a lot of other researchers. The equivalence work has. So in those terms, those are very important pieces of work. Whether they stay important, how long they'll be important, I don't know. But the environment has to determine the importance. I don't really feel qualified to say. So
it's more looking at the effect on the community.
Yes, absolutely.
Researchers and
yes,
behavior analysts. How do you think behavior analysis has changed over the years during your career?
Well, it's become kind of an independent science. At the beginning, we didn't expect that. We expected that behavior analysis was going to take over psychology.
Right.
Never succeeded at doing that. Psychology became very hostile to behavior analysis. So that never did happen.
Was there a point, but there must have been a point in time when you were thinking that, was there a movement or any momentum toward that, or was that just a dream and then at some point?
It was just a dream, I think. That's all. We figured since we had the techniques for finding out answers that the rest of psychology didn't have, that there was a science, they were automatically going to come around to what we were doing. That's just reasonable. And it never happened. And there's been, of course, a lot of debate in the literature about why that never happened. And some people blame ourselves for having become very provincial. And there was a certain amount of that. We had become isolated, and we stopped being interested in many other things that we should be interested in, even today. Partly, hostility generates hostility. So.
Yeah. Well, and I suppose to specialize in the topic areas you wanted to study, you've got to devote time and effort toward those things, and that leaves less time to be involved in other areas. So the more you get into the topic areas in your discipline, the less you become involved in other ones.
Some people did it, and they had good effect. Joe Brady got involved in a lot of things in psychology, and has been recognized for that too. But very few of us were able to do that. My reaction was to become hostile to psychology and say, we got to become independent. Got to form our own science. And that's what we tried to do, apparently. But maybe it's succeeding now. It's just beginning to succeed, I think. But partly because we're getting interested in other fields again. One of the big changes that's taken place in behavior analysis has been the development of applied behavior analysis. That's been a huge development, to the point where a lot of experimentalists regret it. They don't want that association anymore. I think that's a terrible mistake.
Well, it's almost, by head count at least, it's probably overshadowed the basic research area.
No question of that. And you go to ABBA, and there's much more applied work there than there is basic work.
Oh, yeah.
And to the extent that there's been that these have become opposing forces, I think is very bad for the field.
Mm-hmm.
I think the basic people have to realize that it's the applied work that allows them to survive.
Right.
In addition, I think basic people ought to be proud of the fact that their basic research has been good general use has been found for their basic research efforts. A lot of basic researchers aren't that pleased. I think they should be. And so this divide between the two is something that bothers me a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's good for either side.
Yeah.
I think the applied people need the continued development of basic research also. And so that's a problem I think that needs fixing.
Yeah. Well, I know it's been an issue for decades.
Yeah.
And there's been some attempts. There have been specific things that Jab and Java have both done.
Yes.
About publishing the research from the other journals and
Yes.
trying to maintain some kind of bridge.
Yes.
So we're at least continually aware of the tension between the basic area and the applied area.
Yeah. Oh yes. Yeah. People are aware of it all right.
Yeah.
They have different reactions to it.
Right.
So,
Right.
some want it to continue.
That's true.
Yeah.
Is there anything in your career that you do differently?
Well,
I mean, you're pretty successful, so I would think that'd be a risky answer there.
well, personally, yes, but I think the extent to which I wanted us to be independent has been a mistake. I think we should have continued to try to build bridges.
Between behavior analysis and psychology.
Psychology.
The
Yes.
broader field of psychology.
Yes. I never published. I rarely published in anything but behavior analytic journals.
Mm-hmm.
The equivalence work, for example, I publish only. People have asked me how that's obviously relevant
Mm-hmm.
to what's taken over from behavior analysis. What do they call it?
Cognitive psychology.
Cognitive psychology. It's a word I can't remember.
Well, was your
But I always said, well, I know the people who are going to take my work and use it.
Mhm.
And they're in behavior analysis, not in
Right.
cognition. The cognitive people, even if they publish it, will ignore it. And so that's why I never did that. I think that was a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
I just recently wrote a paper. I was invited to write it for some strange reason for the Japanese Journal of Cognitive Studies.
Really?
Yeah. They asked me to write a paper on symmetry, the concept of symmetry.
Oh.
So I said, well, talk about symmetry and equivalence relations.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Was that part of a special issue they were?
the special issue on symmetry,
Really?
the concept of symmetry. Yeah.
Interesting topic.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting. The person who asked me to write the paper, I sent it in to him, and he thanked me for it, very pleased, thought it was a good paper. He says he's been reading my book, the equivalence relations, and he said, and I'm going to continue to struggle through it. He thought he was saying something complimentary, but his vocabulary wasn't quite right.
Lost in translation
Yeah.
a little bit there. Well, maybe you'll have to put out a Japanese version yourself.
That won't be easy.
What areas of the field would you like to see more work in?
Well, I think stimulus control, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
The effects of reinforcement have been the major focus of research and behavior analysis.
Mm-hmm.
But reinforcement has its effects only in an environment, and we have to learn a lot more, I think, about how that environment affects our behavior.
Mm-hmm.
The 3-term contingency, the 4-term, the 5-term contingency.
Right.
I think a lot more has to be done along those lines. Another kind of thing is the behavior of scientists.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't done anything, I don't think, along those lines. I think that's very important. Why do we do what why do scientists do what they do? How can we get more people to do those kinds of things? Which means more attention to our teaching programs as well. What are we doing with our own students? Are we turning them into scientists, or are we turning them away from science?
Right. Well, I know I teach the research methods, the graduate research methods here, and I have looked for material on the behavior of scientists, and there's very little work. There's, of course, Skinner's case study.
Yes.
I would like to see that updated to today's environment in the university, which would be heavily about grant-oriented activities. It'd be very different kind of approach. And Johnson and Pennypacker's chapter from their book on developing research questions, which is an interesting analysis, but it's not a database analysis of the behavior of scientists.
That's right. Skinner's notion that research is an interactive enterprise between subject and experimenter. That's a fascinating notion to me. And I find it interesting to look back and see how my behavior has been changed by what my subjects have done. And he points out that's what goes on in an experiment.
Right.
Subjects do things, you respond by doing something different. Subject responds to that, and you change your behavior, you do something else. It's a wholly different philosophy of research than the standard one, which is you make a theory and then test it.
Right, with static conditions.
Yes.
You run this group and this and that group and that.
Yes.
How was your book, Tactics of Scientific Research, received by the broader psychological community? Was there any interest in single subject designs?
There didn't seem to be any interest at all. It wasn't even reviewed.
Really?
Yeah.
You know, at the time, well, later on, I guess, in the 60s.
It's becoming more, people are beginning to talk about it a little more than they used to in psychology. They're rediscovering the notion themselves.
Yeah.
And maybe then finding that other people have written about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you can see some statistical analysis books these days that have references to within subject designs.
Yes.
Maybe that's coming back.
I think it might be, yeah.
They're so convenient and flexible. I just can't imagine why the rest of the community doesn't see that they're perfectly fine for a lot of experimental questions.
Oh, I can't imagine why the rest of the community doesn't see that we're doing the right thing all along.
What do you see as the future of behavior analysis?
Well, I don't know that I can predict the future, really. The future's in the hands of our students, the younger people, and they're going to determine that. And I hope they're going to take behavior analysis in directions that I can't foresee at all. I hope that's going to happen. I'm sure it is. We don't know who's going to do it, where they're going to come from, or anything. So I don't think I can really predict where it's going to go. I think one area it's going to go into is expanding into much broader kinds of questions. The work that Sigrid is doing, for example.
On cultural analysis.
Cultural analysis is a very important. We have to move into that area. Otherwise, I mean, those are the questions that people are interested in these days. And Vicki Lee said in her book that all sciences start with questions that the man in the street is asking. And the scientists grab those questions and find real answers to them. Physicists have always done that. Chemists have always done that. And psychologists have to do the same kind of thing. We have to take questions that people are asking and start investigating them. What are they really all about?
You know who was always good at that? I don't mean a person, but I mean a community of people, were the social psychologists, who always asked, observe common phenomena in society.
Oh, they've always done that.
And had very interesting topics.
But what they've done mostly in other areas of psychology is seen phenomena, given them the names, and then made those names the causes.
Right. Right.
And,
right. And never pushed it beyond
that's
that.
right. But people are interested in them because they talk about those things.
Yes. Yes.
They don't say anything meaningful about them, but they talk about them.
Yeah. Well, I did a similar thing in graduate school. What you were talking about.
I remember what you did in graduate
well,
school.
I taught. Yeah, but when I was teaching, I taught social psychology for a couple of years.
Oh, I see.
And it forced me to have to try to interpret and try to make sense out of those topic areas from a behavior analytic viewpoint, which was a great exercise. It's a real stretch.
Yes.
Because there are so many wide-ranging topics in there that it's one of those. It's kind of a mental exercise, I guess, to look at those things and see what can we say about those. Do we have anything useful to say about those things? And I think everybody ought to.
Well, good for you. Schoenfeld did the same thing. He taught the social psychology course several times at Columbia, and he said it was a great experience.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And it's very entertaining. It's a naturally entertaining area. So I'd always recommend that to anybody to try out.
Well, that's very good.
Their behavioral chops on something.
That's very good. Now, more people should be encouraging their students to do that kind of thing. Don't just put them into teaching the one section of the introductory psychology course.
Right.
Get them into social psychology.
Yeah, it does expand.
Get them into abnormal psychology.
Yeah.
I don't know if they call it that anymore. That's what they used to call it.
Clinical psychology is probably what they call it these days. What do you think of the bridge between behavior analysis and neuroscience?
I think it's a very important bridge that has to be built. Absolutely. From my work with stroke patients, for example, I just could never go along with these people who tried to say that the nervous system has nothing to do with the study of behavior. Obviously, it has a lot to do with it.
Yeah.
God.
Obviously.
You see what's happened to the behavior of these people because of just a little something that happened in their head. Good Lord. And of course, there are many other examples of that. Now people are beginning to be able to look inside and see what is happening.
Yes.
But behavior analysts aren't the people who are giving them the behavior to look at. And there has to be a lot more of that.
Well, we're doing some of that here.
Oh, that you are here.
You know, Manish and the Barrett Project here.
Yes.
Looking at the neuroscience with some operant behavior preparations.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
But definitely the measurement technology, the imaging systems are what has opened up that whole area to research. I was just interested in that because there was always some connection because behavioral pharmacology goes back to the 50s.
But it started without any reference to the
physiology
at all.
Right.
That came in later.
That's right.
We started out just by studying the behavior as a result of the drug.
Right. So at some point, speaking about future events, then at some point it would be interesting to see a much greater integration than between what we do in behavior analysis and what used to be called operant conditioning and the neuroscience.
Absolutely. This is critical. I mean, even Skinner recognized that. That eventually neurophysiology was going to be able to, quote, explain everything that we were seeing in behavior, which didn't reduce the importance of studying behavior at all.
No, certainly.
Not at all. But we should be showing those people what kind of behavior they want to look at.
Right. Right. Yeah, I would like to see more of that. That's a fascinating area.
I think it's got to be. If we don't do that, we threaten to cut ourselves off.
Yes. Yeah. What message would you like to send to students of the future?
What method?
Message.
Oh, message.
Yeah.
Oh, well. As I said before, I think the main message is that my message, my personal message, has to be carried by my research. If you find it useful, use it. That would be my personal message as far as how they should treat anything I've done. Otherwise, the main message is stay open. Don't be afraid to ask any question, and don't be afraid to listen to any question that a student asks.
Mm-hmm.
Encourage them to ask questions. That's what Schoenfeld taught me. Question everything. Many students found him very difficult because they would say something and he would ask, well, now how do you know that? We should be encouraging our students to ask that question. How do you know that?
Mm-hmm. You know, it's one of the interesting things that I observed, and I try to communicate to graduate students. But there's a big difference between when you're an early graduate student and a later graduate student. And my experience with that I try to get them to see is that first you think everything has been answered because you're learning all of this material. But the more time you spend in the field, the more you realize how little we know, and more questions start coming up.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I think we should be looking for students. You know, something's happening now that wasn't happening when I was a student. Nobody came planning to be a psychologist, let alone a behavior analyst.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody got into psychology from some other interest that they had to start with. And we need more of that now.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're seeing people seeing psychology, seeing behavior analysis as a viable profession.
Mm-hmm.
They can make a living, they can survive.
Right.
And it's interesting, and so they go into it deliberately.
Mm-hmm.
We need more students who just stumble into it from other areas because they have interesting kinds of questions to ask that don't come out of the field itself. And I think we need more of that. People who want to know things that maybe that we don't know the answers to yet.
With those different backgrounds.
Yes.
People coming in,
Yes.
like we've had people coming in from engineering disciplines
Yes.
and things like that.
Yeah.
That is such a different kind of approach, but it tends to mesh well with what we're doing.
Yes. So I think we have to look for that kind of student more. I think not the ones who pass the standard examination high grades.
Well, that's interesting. That's another one of those paradoxes of as the more you become successful academically, the more you have programs with majors and things like that, so you end up producing people who get exposed to behavior analysis more thoroughly.
Yes.
But to some degree, that may narrow the field of entrance or applicants to the field because they're not sort of spontaneously wandering in from other areas. But that's
right.
That's also a feature of the modern university to some degree. Is that?
Oh yes. Yeah, that's true. It's not just behavior analysis.
Yeah.
Suffers from that. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure physicists might say the exact same thing.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. They speak of interdisciplinarity for the faculty in terms of research interest, but it hasn't quite translated down to the undergraduate level in terms of saying maybe you should change majors several times through your career or bounce around and check out other things other than the core courses. Which
well, that's interesting. When I went through Columbia as an undergraduate, they had a system. I don't know. They probably don't have it anymore. We didn't have to have a major.
Really?
Yeah. What they had was that they had what they called maturity credits attached to every course, almost every course. Some had 0 or only 1. And you had to have not only so many points to graduate, you had to have so many maturity credits. And that kept you from just taking introductory courses. And
it forced you to take upper level courses.
You had to take other, yes. And
but no majors.
So I never had a major.
Well, that's a very different way of going through college.
I think it's a very good idea. I wish they kept it up.
Yeah.
It's true. When I went to the Mass General from Walter Reed, one of the things that happened then, I wanted to work with humans, of course, and they had this problem: how do you communicate with people who don't communicate, and communicate non-verbally. One of the things that was going on in Boston at that time was Sid Bijou was working with Jim Holland on programming devising programs to work with children.
Mm-hmm.
Bijou's area.
Mm-hmm.
And they were using matching the sample. They were trying to program errorless matching the sample.
Mm-hmm.
And I copied their techniques outright. It's wonderful. I had, well, I don't want to describe the apparatus and everything. It's so old-fashioned. People won't understand what I'm talking about. They don't know what a slide projector is anymore.
The electromechanical equipment.
Yeah.
From the,
Yeah. But I literally copied their equipment.
And that led to the early...
I have photographs of it. I sent a photograph once to Andy Littell.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Gee, what is that cumulative recorder? I never saw one like that." I said, it had the pen attached to the end of a slide tray and a slide projector. And it was the movement of the slide tray that determined where the pen went.
Oh, wow.
As we were trying to program stimulus control.
Right.
And it showed where in the program the student was at all times.
Oh, that's fascinating.
That sort of thing, yeah. So that was one of the things that happened at that time. Then in the course of working with the stroke patients, we started working with some what we called retarded children.
Mm-hmm.
They can't say that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It's got to be children with retardation.
Mm-hmm.
If you say retarded children, that's supposed to say something bad about them.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't use that term anymore. Anyway, we started working with them.
And that was what led to the 1973 publication, Matching the Sample, that sort of led to the stimulus equivalence line.
The 73 publication, which one was that?
I think that
I have
that was the one
I
that
have my
had
publication list here.
with retarded children, I think, in the
Oh, the one in the book with Stoddard.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. We started programming circle ellipse discrimination.
Right.
We started with.
Right.
Yeah. Taught them to discriminate circles from ellipses. Errorlessly, we made a program that did that.
Yeah.
And one subject we had during that time was prophetically maybe named Cosmo. And it was a microcephalic. It was amazing. It was genetically determined.
Mm-hmm.
Again, convinced me that genes have something to do with behavior.
Yeah.
Because we have pictures of this whole family, and they all look alike.
Really?
Yeah. You can't tell them apart. They all had the same head, the same small head, the same features.
So that was
fantastic.
a genetic abnormality.
Genetic abnormality.
Mm-hmm.
And we worked with him. Interesting enough, he taught us a lot more than we taught him.
Mm-hmm.
He taught us what's really involved in learning. You don't see it when you work with regular smart kids, because they learn everything so
it's
fast.
so fast.
You don't see
Right.
what's happening.
Right.
We had to teach this fella everything, absolutely everything. The most complicated thing he could do when we started was maybe pile some blocks until they fell over. He could pile maybe 6 or 7. That's about the most complicated thing he could do.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. He was my age,
Really?
a year younger than me.
Oh.
And,
Well, can you tell me more about working with the stroke patients then? This was in Mass General?
in Mass General.
In the hospital in Boston?
Yes, in Boston, yes. And for several years I had some very fine medical students and interns and residents working in my lab. And I didn't realize how much I depended on them. They went out and they did their rounds, and they brought the patients back into the lab. The first year I didn't have a medical student. After several years I suddenly didn't have a resident in my lab. I discovered I didn't have any subjects anymore. And one of the people in the neurology staff had said to me, actually, "Murray, if you really want to succeed here, go to medical school."
Really?
He knew what he was talking about. I didn't appreciate it until later. He was a very fine man, a wonderful neurologist and a wonderful person, actually. He told me that when he met me privately in an elevator. I talked to him, nobody else could hear it.
Well, so did you finish up your medical degree?
No, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to treat people.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have that responsibility, I think.
But was this a basic research lab or a
It was both.
rehabilitation?
It was both.
Yeah.
I had my office here, and on this side was a lab with cubicles in it for human research, and on this side we had boxes for monkey research. I could go in either direction for my lab. And some of my people worked in one or the other, and some worked in both. And this lab in here, we had the big matrix with the 8-key matrix, 9-key matrix.
This is for the matching the sample?
Matching the sample. People sat there, and we also set it up so that we'd get a monkey from over here, put him in a cage, bringing him in, set him on a tabletop in front of that matrix, and slide the door to his cage up, and he could work on exactly the same programs that we were working with.
Really? What kind of monkeys were they?
Rhesus.
Rhesus. Oh.
Yes, yes. So we were doing both, both basic research and, well, the applied research didn't really become too applied, except to the extent that we did teach the retarded children a lot of academic skills.
The reading and so on.
Joe Brady mentioned that committee, that national committee he was on that went around the country investigating human research. And they came to our place. I was working out at the Walter E. Fernald School for Retarded Children. I had a big applied project there. Worked with about 30, 40 severely retarded children. And on work that we had started at the Mass General. Eventually my labs moved out to the Fernald School from the Mass General.
Right.
Because the neurology service started a whole new research center there. And we moved our labs into that research center. But Joe and his committee came around, and they brought us each in one at a time to talk about how we protected the rights of our human subjects. And they found, when they talked to me, that I never got permission to work with these kids. I just went into their buildings and took them out into the lab and worked with them.
Nowadays, you have to do a lot of coverage of
that. Now, but at that time, I said, well, I said, I don't do that, and I don't plan to, I said, to these people. Unless you do one thing. You require all the standard teachers in the schools for these children to do the same thing, to get permission to work with these children, because those teachers do these kids much more harm than I do.
Right.
Well, they bought that.
They did?
Yes, yes. I never heard another thing from them.
Well, you're fortunate because there's a lot more regulation over that.
Now I know.
These days.
I couldn't get away with that now.
Yeah.
But we were actually teaching them. We taught them.
Sure.
We taught them their colors and their words, and matching words to pictures, spoken words and written words. We taught them to read. So we taught them enough so that most of those kids got out. Not into independent living, but into halfway houses and that sort of thing.
Right.
So at one time, it was a very exciting time in one way for me, and in another way it was a very burdensome time. I had about over 100 people on the payroll. I had to bring in money to support all these people, and that eventually got too much for me.
Was that grant money?
Yeah, grant money.
Who was funding that at the time?
NIH, one or another division of NIH.
There is a lot of pressure to...
It is, and I finally decided, well, no, these people have got to go out on their own, including these researchers that I had working with me. Harry Mackay and Barbara Ray, and several others.
Was there any discussion during that time of developing that as an education package, as something that you could kind of bundle up and disseminate to?
Well, again, I was naive. I thought just the obvious success that I had with these kids was going to make the administrators at this place, this so-called school for retarded children, use these systems and start instituting them. They paid no attention at all. And when we stopped, the project just gradually faded out and disappeared.
Yeah, yeah. I think it looks like you have to.
You have to do much more.
Yeah, you have to develop the package.
You have to.
And
You've
figure out how to
not just
disseminate
work
it.
with the children. You've got to work with the administrators, the
Mhm.
middle level people especially.
Right.
The high level people were all in favor of what I was doing.
Really?
But the middle level people, yeah, they supported me. They gave me
Mhm.
the space and everything else. But the middle level administrators
Mhm.
were very difficult. I remember one time, one special grant we had to teach kids. It came to the summertime, and what we did was we hired teachers, and they were paid for by the state educational system. But they didn't pay teachers in the summertime.
Mhm.
I went downtown and found my way to this dark office. There was a middle-aged man sitting there, and I tried to get his permission to pay my teachers in the summertime. I had the money. The
Mhm.
state didn't have to pay it.
Mhm.
They got their money from my grant. No, that's against the rules. Couldn't do it. It was terrible.
Good grief.
You have to try to work with those people as well as your children.
Right. Right.
And that was a mistake I made. I didn't know that. I was naive.
Mhm. Well, that might be one advantage of having these days of having a more developed applied arm
Yes,
of the
yes,
field.
yes. I think that's more realized now. People understand that better now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, to some degree, there's a marketplace out there,
Yeah.
and people can
But
package these
we
things.
still, for the most part, don't have courses in which we teach our students to do that.
Mhm. Right.
How do you work with people in the educational establishment?
Yeah. Well, some
Boy.
people like Ogden Lisley have, said that's very difficult to do, and working with the education system.
Yes, I think it's the most difficult thing of all. I still have tremendous hostility toward the educational system itself. That, there are hundreds of thousands of wonderful teachers who are effective and good, do good work. But it's not because of what they've learned in teachers' college. It's in spite of it.
Mhm.
The only solution I've been able to think of is to burn down all the teachers' colleges and then let the good ones be rebuilt.
Mhm.
I had never been in an academic setting for 20 years. I went right to Walter Reed and then to the Mass General, and that was approximately 20 years. And then I was invited over to Northeastern to join the faculty,
Mhm.
and it looked very interesting to me, so I went. And
That was in what year?
1972, I
Mhm.
guess, yeah. And well, I didn't know quite how to handle that situation. I came out with a very bad taste in my mouth about academe,
Mhm.
and I had a very difficult time there. And I had some very fine students there who made it worthwhile. And I had a very, very difficult time. If I had started in academe right from graduate school, I would have learned how to handle it.
Sure.
But after 20 years coming in with my background, I didn't know how to handle the kinds of things that were going on there. They would kill for a square foot of space that nobody could use anyway.
That hasn't changed in 30 years.
Well, there are a few places that have at least gone through cycles where they haven't been that way.
Mhm.
But I never had that at Northeastern. I started out, they gave me the pro seminar to teach, with
The overview.
they go through, and different faculty members take different sections and teach their specialties
Mhm.
in graduate course. And I made the mistake of sitting in on all of the classes. I thought maybe I had something to contribute, and if I did, I spoke up. So that was a terrible mistake.
That didn't go over well.
That didn't go over well at all. And I came out of a tenure meeting once screaming after what they had tried to do, what they had done to a wonderful, wonderful faculty member by refusing him tenure
Mm.
for the reasons they did it. Just so infuriated me. I came home and I said to Rita, I'm never going to another faculty meeting of any kind, because if I do, I'm going to have a heart attack and I'm going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And I never did. And that's one of the things I would probably change if I did it again. I would be a better university citizen than I was.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I handled it badly. But
So then you went to the New England Center?
when I left there, finally, I said, well, I want to continue doing my research, and I sent letters around to various places, schools and other places, asking if maybe they had a room for me where I could come and work. I didn't want a salary, and I'd bring my own apparatus, and if they just let me come and do my research. And a couple of places thought they might like that, and we looked into it a little. And then this offer came from the New England Center. And when I compared that to the others, I realized, no, I don't want to go back into academia again.
Mm-hmm.
At the New England Center, Vinnie Strelli, who ran the center and still does, said, we'll give you this space, and we'll ask nothing of you, except that you do what you want to do. And we'll give you not a salary, you don't want a salary, we'll give you a little money to cover some of your research expenses. And he stuck to that. I was there for almost 10 years too, more than 10 years I think, and had a wonderful time there, working with autistic children, and trying to teach the workers there how to teach autistic children, trying to develop ways to teach them on the computer. They hadn't done it all there. And we developed a lot of techniques, and eventually they developed a computer lab. They call it the Murray Sidman Laboratory, which was very flattering. And so I had a very fine time there at the New England Center. And finally, when we moved to Florida, I left there too.
Yeah. So you're not currently running any subjects in Florida then?
Well, I can run subjects any place, anytime I can bring my computer to them.
Right.
And I still do that occasionally.
Really?
Yes. Yes. Oh, there are a lot of problems I'm interested in, experimental problems. I don't have the energy I used to have. And so, where I really would have done most of those by now and been thinking about some other things. I'm still doing a lot of writing, and that takes up my 2 or 3 good morning hours. And after that, I can't do much in a creative way. I find anything I write in the afternoon, I have to rewrite next morning anyway. So
might as well just work in the morning and then wrap it up.
That's it. Yeah. So things go along more slowly now. That's all.